My name is John McWilliams. On behalf of the Milton Historical Society, I invite you to the third installment of our 2024 lecture series this year, where we aim to preserve and promote history. And our speaker today will match the criteria I've shared with some of you before about the ability to inform, entertain, enlighten along the way. I think to an nth degree this afternoon, I'm sure you will agree. And this year has been unusual for me with our speakers compared to the past, because most of the speakers until this season I haven't known except to contact over the phone or through email. But I've had a personal connection with each of our three speakers. The first one in January, a student of mine, and last month in February, a colleague of my wife at State College High School, and today I'd say a neighbor a block away. And it is right through that connection we crossed paths over the years and realized a common interest in the 1960s. Started talking about one thing and another, music. A few years ago this was, I'm not sure if Dan remembers that or not. And so, what a coincidence / fate, I thought to myself, when last June I bumped into him at a church strawberry festival. So, yeah, I remember him, all right? And I thought, talk a little bit more about him. I am, lining up for our slate this year. And started feeling out a little bit about what he was doing with music, and I thought, this is sounding pretty good. We talked a little more later in that. I thought, this is sounding good. I think this will be a great fit. And when I asked him if he'd be willing to make a trip from State College to here, spend a Sunday afternoon with us, he said, sure, I'd be happy to. So I'm very excited that he accepted the invitation to be with us here this afternoon. Professor Dan Letwin has completed his undergraduate work at Cal Berkeley and doctoral work at Yale, and has been teaching American history courses at Penn State University since 1991. And so again, we're pleased to have him with us this afternoon. Talk about This Land is Your Land, a brief history of American protest, music and protest traditions. So please give him a warm welcome.
We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the waters. We shall not be moved. That's as much as I'll sing of that right now. And I noticed some people were singing along. This song is a traditional anthem of the causes of labor and of civil rights, which are causes that we'll be looking at today. I'm really pleased to be here and to have you all here. And the reputation of the Milton Historical Society precedes itself, and I was very happy and grateful to John and to Polly McWilliams for sponsoring my appearance here today. I'm pleased to have you all here to share in exploring the place of song and in a very real way of singing in the history of social movements of this country. I might mention that my personal interest in the place of in this topic of protest music is really primal. It goes back to my early childhood. It's really from my family, my parents and my grandparents, who were Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe about a century ago, and very involved in the labor movement and the cause of civil rights. And so some of the songs that we'll be hearing today are songs that I learned almost as soon as I learned nursery rhymes. Now, social movements have played a vital part in U.S. history. Much of the drama of the American past, much of the heartache, and much of the inspiration of our history has turned on a series of causes, social movements, campaigns to bring the realities of American life into line with the ideals that we cherish: human equality, universal rights, the promise of a decent life for all, something called freedom. Over the generations since our nation's founding, since the age of the American Revolution, these causes have ranged from the quest for national independence, the abolition of slavery, the equal place of women, racial equality, the rights of labor, the rights of newcomers to our shores from other lands, the pursuit of peace. I might mention that Pennsylvania has been often front and center, a real seedbed for many of these movements, starting, of course, with the patriotic revolt against British rule, to the movement for an end to slavery. It's worth noting that the Underground Railroad, oh, what happened to it? I've lost the Underground Railroad. But the Underground Railroad ran abundantly through all parts of our Commonwealth. The movement for women's rights, to a number of memorable episodes in the cause of labor, whether arising in old Philadelphia. I see, I thought on it. There's the Underground Railroad. Labor, the dawn, really the birth of the U.S. labor movement is largely in Philadelphia, back in the 1820s and the 1830s, to the Carnegie Steel Works at Homestead, site of the great Homestead strike of 1892. The Molly Maguires of the anthracite coal region of Pennsylvania, the freight yards of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Now, every time people come together to challenge the status quo, to rally for some vision of social justice, there are certain images that tend to come to mind, right? Marches, banners, slogans, petitions, mass meetings, spirited and impassioned speeches, right? But above all, it seems to me, there's the music. Songs sung for and often by people who are on the march, who are walking picket lines for better conditions, who are sitting in to challenge discrimination, who are being hauled off in paddy wagons for violating or breaking unjust laws. Whether it's old and familiar songs that a protest crusade might turn to, or new ones that arise out of a particular campaign, it's often music, above all, that sustains a movement's spirit. It gives it its voice. And looking back, music is one of the key ways in which a movement is remembered even generations later. So, simple question, what is it about music? What gives song such a powerful place in the heritage of American protest movements? What is it that makes songs more than just a reflection of the soul, of the vision of movements for social justice, but also a vital source of its power, of its energy, of its inspiration? That's what I invite us to explore today. Now, if there are two things that are perhaps universal in the human condition, something evident even in topics, it seems to me that one is a keen sense of justice, an indignation over injustice. How many of you have had kids whose one of their first sentences was the eloquent sentence, "No fair!" Right? There's something kind of built in at an early age. And second, I think a universal kind of feature of humanity is a passion for music. It's a central part of cultures and societies everywhere, and music gives expression to the full range of emotions, of human emotions. And so it's no surprise if these are two universal features of humanity. It's no surprise that traditions of protest music have arisen all over the world and throughout history. So, of course, the United States is only one point in a much wider history, heritage of protest songs. And yet, in its short history, the American tradition of protest songs has spanned a range of crusades. And today I want to focus on two of the major strands of this tradition, the causes of labor and of civil rights. These, of course, are two of the main arenas of the ongoing struggle for social justice in America, and they're very interconnected at that. And in each of these causes, each of these movements, you find music has had a key place. So what I'd like to do is to focus in depth on a handful of tunes. You've received, I hope, the handout sheet. I won't promise to get to all these tunes because I want to play them and give us the chance to kind of discuss them. And so we'll get as many in as time and patience allows. For each song, I would be inviting us to consider what is it that made it so resonant and often so enduring, often still known, still speaking to us long after the movement that gave rise to it has passed from the scene. Now, at this point, allow me to propose a theme to help us frame how we hear and think about these songs. As I've said, the songs were not only reflections of the struggle for the rights of labor and of African Americans in the civil rights struggle. They were essential, songs were essential components, driving forces. And in exploring what gave these songs their historic thrust, often their lasting power, the first thing I think we should bear in mind is that their impact and the place they had in the protest tradition can't be reduced to just one feature. You just consider, and you don't have to memorize this, and you won't be tested on it, but I just want to kind of put out there that the power of a song of protest can, for instance, lie in how it challenges mainstream ways of thinking, or in how it dissects and ridicules and satirizes the status quo, or in how it educates the public and voices indignation over current injustice, or how it can provide a way of mourning the sacrifices made by those taking part in a movement, or how it can contribute to the lore of movement battles, telling the stories of both victory and of defeat, or how it can convey a vision of a more humane world, and sometimes even lay out a plan for getting there. And not least, how music can embolden activism, which is often something that takes courage, and how it can build solidarity. Dr. Martin Luther King recognized this dynamic, describing how freedom songs of the civil rights movement invigorate and serve to give unity to a movement. Finally, a protest song can be compelling simply by being a great piece of music in its own right. Just having that certain quality that makes a song soar, kind of transport us. So, bearing all these characteristics of protest music in mind, let's turn to a series of songs that came out of, and in turn, bolstered and enlivened the causes of labor and African American rights. Now first, we'll go around a century back to the early 20th century. Still very much an era of America's industrial takeoff, of course. A time when labor conflict was at a high pitch. Workers and employers from one setting to another locked horns over a range of issues. The conditions of labor, the length of the workday, levels of pay, not to mention the very right to organize and have a collective voice. The labor movement was composed of a number of organizations of differing perspectives. Perhaps the most radical of all, and the one that had some of the most memorable songs, was the Industrial Workers of the World, or the IWW, as it was widely known. Unlike other branches of the labor movement, the IWW believed in organizing workers of every background, women and men, immigrants as well as the native born, black and white, working people of every trade, every skill. They organized miners and agricultural laborers, often migrant laborers, factory workers, seamen, railroad workers, timber workers, common laborers in every setting. The IWW's ultimate goal was to mobilize a general strike of all workers, which would usher in the emancipation of working people everywhere. And not surprisingly, for such a spirited organization, the IWW was a motherlode of labor songs, many of them composed by the legendary Swedish immigrant who came to be known as Joe Hill. Joe Hill was an itinerant laborer and an IWW organizer, a familiar sight at hobo jungles, on picket lines, at big rallies. His songs, many of them gathered in the IWW's Little Red Songbook, dealt with the struggles of workers of all varieties. But it's not a song by Joe Hill, if only because of time. It's not a song by Joe Hill that I'd like to introduce, but rather a song about him. For in 1915, in the state of Utah, where there was fierce battles, among other things, at the copper mines, labor battles there. Joe Hill was tried for murder on what was widely regarded as a trumped-up charge. And he was executed before a firing squad in November of 1915. His martyrdom gave rise to a song, originally a poem by Alfred Hayes, written in the 1920s and composed into music by Earl Robinson in the 30s, simply called Joe Hill. You'll find the lyrics on the first page of your handout. And before we listen, I would just like to just quickly read through some of this. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night. It begins as a poem. Alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. And then as you read through, get a sense of the inspiration that the author of the poem and then of the music sought to provide. That last verse before the end. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where workers strike and organize, that's where you'll find Joe Hill. That's where you'll find Joe Hill. If you're disappointed with the quality of that singing, what I can offer you now is 5 successive people singing the song. And the reason I want to do that is, here we go. Part of what can confirm the lasting and enduring impact of a song of protest, its transcendent quality, is its ability is its ability to survive and find voice in generations long after, in this case, the life of Joe Hill had just become a distant memory. So there's actually 6 verses, and I've got 5 different singers who, they're each going to sing a verse, right? Listen to the lyrics, listen also to the mood of the song, and note the variety of periods and settings for these songs. The first is Pete Seeger, who, as many of you may be familiar with. Pete Seeger, he is an iconic figure in the history of American folk music, and he's going to get the first verse. So that is Pete Seeger. Now let's go to 1949. Pete Seeger actually sang that in the mid-70s. As a youth, I happened to see him perform in concert on that tour. I don't know if it was the concert I went to. This is Paul Robeson, who is difficult to reduce to one thing. He was a great singer, a Shakespearean actor, an activist in the causes of labor and civil rights. And here he is singing this song to a group of Welsh coal miners in 1949. Second verse. I hate to cut these brilliant singers off, but they have to share the stage. We're going to move now to, of all places, to the Woodstock Festival of 1969. How many of you were at Woodstock? You don't have to raise your hand if you want to keep it quiet. You know, Woodstock, of course, was the kind of the great gathering of the hippie counterculture of the 1960s. Not many people know, and in fact, I had long forgotten, that Joan Baez sang Joe Hill at Woodstock, verse 3. Okay, now let's go to Tampa on what was International Workers' Day in 2014. And who is singing Joe Hill on that day? But ironically, the boss, right? Bruce Springsteen gets verse 4. You know what, just because of time, we'll leave out, hope that Tom Morello doesn't mind, leave out the 5th verse, because I'd like to, before we move on, I'd like to ask, as we hear this song, And as we hear the words, what is it about this song? Remember, protest songs can have a lot of different features that can inject them with power. Where does the power and the kind of the enduring interest in this song, do you think, come from? I don't have the answer behind my back. Yeah. Pardon? Yeah. Joe Hill famously himself said, "Don't mourn my passing, organize." He wanted his young life, and the end of his young life, to have a meaning. And that's a kind of mourning, isn't it? When we mourn those who passed in social struggles or just in any context. We want to feel that they're still there. We want to feel that they've left us something. So this, the capacity to inject tragedy and the trauma of a loss like this with some sort of affirming meaning and a beautifully written song must have something to do with why this song is still among us. There's one other song out of the IWW era that I'd like to play, and that is Bread and Roses. So you'll find that in the next. By James Oppenheim and Caroline Kolstad, which came out of the legendary textile strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts during the early months of 1912. Toggling back and forth. The strike was a walkout of workers from textile mills across the town of Lawrence, spurred by a general and a drastic wage cut that were presented to the workers. And what was remarkable is that these were overwhelmingly women workers. Many of the girls, because child labor was a deep reality at that time. And they were mainly immigrants coming from scores of countries, near and far across the world, speaking many languages. And their collective walkout defied the common belief that an ethnically diverse immigrant group of women workers could never pull off an effective strike. Even in the face of state militiamen pointing their bayonets at the picket lines, thousands of striking women, ultimately tens of thousands, and children held strong, delivering impassioned speeches, marching in picket lines and parades, and the burdens that they carried demanded both a decent wage and dignity. The slogan that you saw on banners, "We want bread and roses too." And that gave the work stoppage its lasting name, the Bread and Roses strike that's depicted here. With violence in the air, striking families sent hundreds of children to Manhattan, where they were greeted by thousands of people at Grand Central Station, sympathizers with the strike, to live with relatives or strangers who were strike supporters. And that did much to bring attention to the plight of the immigrant poor, of women, children, and the Lawrence strike became a national cause. So let's now listen to Bread and Roses, and this is sung much later again by Jo Baez and her sister Mimi Farina. And as we listen and read the lyrics, again, what is it about this song that gives it? I could have come up with many other singers who have sung this song, over the generations since. What is the power of this song? What is it about that song that has sort of entered it into that kind of roster of long-remembered classics?
First, it's women, and secondly, they're not only demanding the necessities of life and community.
Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us wings. Very powerful. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I teach high school. It seems to me there's a two-step process. You've got like a lot of people in the audience and watching Bruce Springsteen or Woodstock would not have by themselves be drawn to this song. But there's somebody that has a certain respect in the community that has their own approach, and they're not following the crowd. They've got their own interests, their own concerns, and they find something here. And when Joan Baez sings a song, suddenly Woodstock, this is something worth hearing. When Bruce Springsteen sings it, this is now a song worth hearing. So it's obviously they wouldn't go against everything everyone believes it wouldn't work, but they can find something that no one else would see on their own and highlight it, and then it's like, well, Bruce Springsteen already has that respect, and Joan Baez has that respect.
That's eloquently put. Yeah. Yeah. These are interpreters and they're presenters. I've always viewed Springsteen as a folk singer as well as a rock and roll singer. And I think in part because he respects, it's not all just about the latest moment, what's happening in music. He kind of respects heritage, in this case of struggle, that goes with that, and gives him finds ways of connecting with an audience. Any other thoughts? Let's move forward. We could spend a lot of time with any of these songs, I feel. Not to mention include many more. But let's move forward to the 1930s. Now, the widespread hardships brought about by the Great Depression are, of course, it is a fixture in our national memory. I mean, just think about the harrowing images that come to mind. Unemployed workers selling apples and pencils on the street. Families evicted from their homes. Humble farms, many of them having been in the family for generations, repossessed by the banks as people, or changing hands under the auctioneer's hammer. Panicky runs on the bank, bread lines, soup lines, millions of people taking to the roads, riding the rails, settling in shanty towns, or Hoovervilles as they came to be known. Migrant farm workers following the crops, hoping to make enough nickels and dimes to get another meal. And the great steel mills and auto plants, coal lines, construction sites, so noisy and bustling in the roaring 20s, now eerily idle. Through images like these, we can kind of glimpse some of the Great Depression's effects across the landscape of America. Less visible, but equally powerful, was the psychological devastation brought about by this crisis. Just imagine the trauma bound to be felt by proud, independent people when, despite all their efforts, they find themselves unable to hold on to their work or level of pay or their homes, their savings, their land. And such hardship inspired some to convey in song the harsh realities they saw around them. And some did it in tones of bewilderment. How had it come to this? Consider a song which was actually, I will say, not really intended as a protest movement song per se. It was a song that actually became a smash hit at the heights or the depths of the Depression. Can anybody guess what I'm thinking of? Another hint. Sung by, pardon? Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? Sung by the celebrated crooner Bing Crosby, and written, the writer of the music of this song is also the writer of another song from the 30s that always seems to be one of the most poignant and gorgeous songs ever, and that is Somewhere Over the Rainbow. He wrote this too. And as we're watching, that's what made this song. Mostly people didn't want to be reminded of the Depression, you know, in their music and movies and so forth in the 30s, but it comes through here. For purposes of time, I think we have plenty already in this song to reflect on. The resonance of this song is evident from the fact that it was a hit, and people were putting their hard-earned nickels to get the record in the middle of the Depression. What is it about this song, the words, the feel of it, that connected with people?
Very useful.
What was it? I'm sorry.
Very useful and powerful.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you want to meet it. And
Bewilderment. How has it come to this? I built a railroad, made it run, made it race against time. Now it's done. I'm standing in line, just waiting for bread. And it goes on to say, I fought in the Great War that would later become World War I, as it was known. We were strong. How did this happen? Now, perhaps one of the reasons why a song of such kind of discontent could nonetheless be allowed onto radio and so forth is that it didn't really point any fingers, did it? It really is just a sense of shock. How did that happen? Right? Not all songs about the hardships of the Depression were so wistful in tone. Others had more of an edge, a tone of bitterness. And to get a feel for this, let's move on to one of the most notable singers, or folk singers of this period, and that is Woody Guthrie, legendary author of the song "This Land Is Your Land." And I'm sorry, it may be false advertising because I'm not going to talk about "This Land Is Your Land" today, though it is a proper name for this talk, I think. John proposed it, and I thought that's a great idea because it is one of the anthems. He wrote So Long It's Been Good to Know Ya, and countless other classics of the 1930s and 40s America. One of his more haunting songs, if less remembered, was called I Ain't Got a Home, based on the old gospel song known variously as Can't Feel at Home or I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore. Guthrie's version spoke to the hardships of small farmers, miners, factory workers, the bitter realities of being down and out, the plight of folks who had long been mired in debt, toiled hard, now evicted from their homes, hounded by police, haunted by hunger and ill health. A world in which, as the line goes, the gambling man, in other words, the businessman, is rich and the working man is poor. And let's listen to Woody Guthrie sing this song. And it's interesting to compare the feel of this song and the theme of this song with what we've just heard, Big Crosby sing, Brother Can You Spare a Dime. Don't mean to interrupt Woody, but let's hand it over to the folk singer Bruce Springsteen again to take the next verse. Any fans of Bob Dylan and the band? Acquired taste, I mean. At the Memorial for Woody Guthrie, they'll take the last verse. Where's the power of this song?
He's speaking to the day-to-day realities of what it's like to live here. during this time, very hard and tough conditions.
He wants to make you feel what people are going through. Which is what Brother Can You Spare a Dime wants to do too. But also, he's pointing fingers. He was a labor radical at this time. So who's he pointing, who are the fingers being pointed at?
Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, take your pick.
I think you would have liked your answer.
Funny, all the authorities get bored and Boston,
Yeah. 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 And that line, now I worry all the time like I never did before. So haunting. Because you know that, part of what he's talking about is a lifetime of hardship and struggle. And now it's just, the bottom is falling out. Now, working people didn't just express their distress over their hardships during the Great Depression. They began to turn to each other, organizing for better conditions, for more of a say over the terms of their labor. One moment. And their lives. And they did so in various ways. You had the Bonus Army of 1932, when a gathering of over 10,000 jobless World War I veterans descended from across the country on Washington to push Congress to appropriate a bonus for needy veterans. Or you had protests against evictions of families who couldn't pay their rent. Protests against the foreclosure of farm mortgages. Demonstrations calling for unemployment relief. Most dramatically, the 30s were a time that saw a renaissance of organized labor. From the docks to the coal mines, auto plants, steel mills, textile mills, to the stockyards, one place after another, workers of all backgrounds, skilled and unskilled, black and white, all ethnic backgrounds, again, women and men, were organizing into mass unions, issuing demands, and often going on strike for higher pay, for better conditions of work, for a place, a voice at the table. And they did so in the face of fierce opposition from management, often fierce, but often with broad community support and with an assist from the federal government as well, which implemented a series of New Deal policies, policies that expanded the rights of labor to organize, policies that indeed were forged largely in response to the pressures welling up at the grassroots from the labor movement itself. Now here too, music played a vital role in encouraging these organizing efforts. And the last labor song I want to talk about, I'd like to get, if there's time, a little bit into civil rights. But it's a song called Talking Union. It's taken off an album of that name by an influential labor movement band called the Almanac Singers. And by the way, here you see Woody Guthrie, he was a part of it. Here you see the young Pete Seeger. Talking Union was more spoken than sung. Talking was a kind of a spoken folk song style. And it represented another function that a song can have within a social movement, a guide to action. As we read along, and as we listen to this song, listen to how it not only makes the case for unionizing, but it offers tips about how to go about it and outlines the challenges that a labor organizing campaign needed to anticipate, could expect to encounter along the way. So it looks like a very long song, but it goes by rather quickly, as you'll hear. And The almanac singer who sings this song is Pete Seeger. That's an interesting song, isn't it? And you have to imagine this is not just on an album. The almanac singers would go to where there were strikes and where unions were seeking to organize, and they performed songs like this at union meetings. What's this song doing? Yeah? Encouraging? Laying out the case? What was that?
Pep rally.
Pep rally. Pardon?
Don't give up.
Yeah. It's kind of spunky.
It's warning about watch for this, watch for this.
Yeah.
watch for this.
Yeah.
What you do for
The thing about song, it strikes me, listening to this song and reading it, that this could almost, doesn't have to be a song. I mean, it could have been written in prose, and it would just be a speech. Someone getting up at a meeting and saying, well, look, this is why we should have a union. But it's not that simple, it'll take this and that, and we're going to face this and that, and this is how we overcome it. But there's something about song, isn't it? It rhymes, it has wit, a certain mischievousness, it's puncturing the pretensions of management. There's a reason why valuable time at a union meeting would be given over to singers, rather than simply, just issuing a line on how you organize. Do we have time for the civil rights?
Go for it. Yes.
Well, There, of course, is a great wealth of civil rights songs that we could spend another hour more on. And in fact, the song I opened with today, a couple lines from, "We Shall Not Be Moved," was a labor song. In fact, the Almanac Singers had it on their Talking Union album in 1941, but it became a song of the civil rights movement. It was sung at the March on Washington. It sounds like coming out of a black gospel church, very moving. But another song whose history captures the overlap of labor and civil rights struggle, perhaps the most transcendent piece of protest music in American history, and that is "We Shall Overcome." And that was a song meant to be sung together. So I'll invite anyone to join me for a few lines. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. This was a song never to simply be performed, always to be sung collectively. And in fact, people would lick arms and sway as they sang this song of exceptional power. A bit of background on the song. It began as a song of individual redemption. At the turn of the century, it was called "I Will Overcome." The story I always heard about the history of this song is that that's what it remained until the mid-40s, when on the picket lines in the Carolinas of tobacco and textile workers, it was turned into a song of labor. We will overcome someday. Interracial unions in the 40s. And then from there, it found its way to the Highlander Center in Tennessee, which was an incredibly courageous center that made it its business to train activists for social justice. And the song found its way from the Carolinas and the picket lines to the Highlander Center, where it was heard by, among others, Pete Seeger, who turned it from "We will overcome someday" to "We shall overcome someday," and taught the song to Martin Luther King and other civil rights movement leaders at the Highlander Center. And from there, it entered into the lifeblood and became perhaps the foremost anthem of the civil rights movement. Parenthetically, I'll mention that when I was writing what became a book about black and white coal miners in Alabama in the early 1900s, and I was reading on a microfilm machine, I'm reading letters from the Alabama coal fields sent in, reporting on what's happening to the United Mine Workers Journal. I almost fell out of my chair when one of those letters, looking back on a major strike in 1908 across the coal fields of Alabama, which had been defeated. And a few months later, he's writing and said, "But I still remember open-air meetings, because we'd been kicked out of our company house on strike. And that great old song would be sung at our union meetings, 'We will overcome someday.'" So back 40 years, even earlier, it had been a song of social struggle. I found Pete Seeger's address and I sent him this document. He wrote back a lovely letter, all excited to sort of learn more about the history of this song. I want to sort of end this on a clip of a couple minutes that illustrates how a song can embolden participants in a movement. We're going to listen to Jamila Jones, who in the 50s was a black girl, teenager, sang as a youth in the Montgomery Gospel Trio and the Harrowby Singers. In 1958, she came to the Highlander Folk Center in Tennessee for nonviolent activist training. As Jones recalls in her interview that we're about to watch a couple minutes of, the Highlander Center while they were there, was raided by the police. They shut off the power to the building. They come to arrest them. And let's hear how she discovers the strength of a protest song at that frightening moment.
Drinking coffee every day.
Whoops, I just realized I'll need half a second to
Went there by night and we came back by night. But one of the things that happened when we were there is the policeman from the city came in. We were having a movie, I believe, that night, Song Fest, and they came in, they turned out all the lights from the city, they turned them out. So we were in complete darkness that night. And we could not see each other. We didn't know where, I didn't know where my sister was. I didn't know where Milton was. We were just there, wherever we were at the time when the lights went out. You know, that's when we sat. And so all these policemen came in, and all we could see basically is the billet club waiting, and the butts of their guns, you could see it shining on the holster. And they told us to sit, you know, of course, stay seated, be quiet, or what have you. And something said, we are not afraid. And everybody started saying, we are. And you could hear people come in. My sister, who is not a singer, I knew she was safe because I heard her out-of-tune voice coming in. And I could hear Minnie's bass coming in about we are not afraid. And we got louder and louder with singing that verse until one of the policemen came and he said to me, if you have to sing, and he was actually shaking, do you have to sing so loud? And I could not believe it. Here these people had all the guns, the billy clubs, the power, we thought. And he was asking me with a shake if I would not sing so loud. And it was that time that I really understood the power of our music. How powerful it was that it unnerved him so much that he had to come and ask that I not sing so loud. And I can just tell you that I got louder and louder. And somehow, even the nature out there in that darkness, because everywhere was dark, but it looked like our voices blended that night to the point of complete harmony and beauty. And from then on, I knew exactly how powerful our songs were.
I can't think of, there's of course more songs to explore always. You'll find a few more of them on the handout, not least 9 to 5, which kind of brings the Bread and Roses theme up into the late 20th century, and the blending of labor, civil rights, and the women's movement. But I can't think of a better note on which to can't improve on the power of her statement about the power of music in struggles to create a more humane more just world. And I thank you all for coming and joining me.
Any questions or comments? I'm happy to take Russ in the back. Yeah.
Dan, please, what led you to come up with this presentation?
Oh, that's actually kind of a personal thing. I mentioned my parents, who were like their parents, very active in sort of social protest movements. My mother was at the March on Washington with her mother in 1963. And so I kind of grew up with that. About 7 or 8 years ago, my mother was living at the Foxdale Retirement Community down the road from my wife Eva and I in State College. And she was on the program committee. And she invited me. She knows as a historian and as a kind of a citizen, I have a lifelong interest in these kinds of movements and in music. And so she invited me to give a talk to her community at Foxdale about this. And that was very moving. It gave me the chance to pull together a selection of songs that I thought, have this kind of power. And to think it got me thinking about, it got me thinking about what is it about songs that make them connect and endure in the ways that these do. And so the first time I spoke on this topic was there in her presence. And she's no longer with us, but I kind of feel like she's here at a time like this.
Did it have anything to do with your education at Cal Berkeley?
Well, maybe the other way around. My going to Cal Berkeley probably had something to do. Because Berkeley, as you may know, I was there in the late 70s. But what drew me to Berkeley was a lot of things. The Bay Area is gorgeous. But also, it was a tradition of all sorts of social protests that went back decades, certainly in the 1960s.
Oh, absolutely. Civil rights movement, free speech movement.
Anti-war. Yeah, free speech movement, all that. So that made Berkeley look like a natural place to kind of...
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I may forget some of what you talked about, but the ending I'll never forget.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. Yeah. That left, I'm sure, an impression on each one of us. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah.
So when you're playing the talking union song, you say it's not even so much singing as talking along,
Yeah.
so it made me think of rap music, and people would criticize that when the students say this isn't really singing, but the words are so important.
Yeah.
And then that also made me think, so what do you think is the state of this today? As I was formulating the question, is that one reason for the crackdown on social media? Is that it's just a means where people can get out any ideas that challenge the status quo?
Social media certainly is a means for everything somewhere or another to get through. Yeah, that's the good, the bad, and the ugly. But it's interesting what you mentioned about rap and hip hop. Sometimes I teach a course on the 60s, so we listen to a lot of 60s music, and I invite them to write about some 60s songs and what it says, about the spirit of the time. And often what they write, and to compare it to now, and often what they write is that songs seem to be much more concerned with social issues back in the 60s than now. But what always strikes me is not if you listen to rap or hip hop. And I don't claim to have some sort of natural ear to the ground. I have two sons who are very into rap and hip hop, and they show us these songs. I've learned a lot from them. That it's interesting you mentioned that that's also more spoken than melodic, but all sorts of social commentary, and a lot of the kinds of, not necessarily organizing, but sort of challenging injustices and hypocrisies that people are facing. Hip-hop and rap, I think, are just brimming with that kind of politics. Yeah.
What do you attribute the kind of diminishing of the unions, say, around 40 years ago, and do you think they're coming back stronger at this point?
I hope they are. And there are abundant signs of youth. I saw a poll mentioned recently that support for unions, in other words, if people are asked, you want to see a revival of unionism, or you want to see the union movement grow, that the support register there is higher than it's been since the mid-1960s today. There was a gathering assault. There was a time following World War II, perhaps some people remember as youths, that in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, the labor movement was stronger than it had ever been, and one industry after another. There's kind of an understanding that collective bargaining was kind of a lot of employers had accepted it, and the government, provided a lot of support. About 30% of American workers were unionized in 1950, which is the high point ever before or since. And by the 80s, there was a gathering assault on unions. And how that succeeded, it succeeded to a great degree. But it seems to me there will always be an impulse to organize, because workers will have a sense of common concerns, common grievances, common aspirations, and there will be a realization that, as the Talking Union song says, if you organize together, you can get a lot done. And there's a lot in the last few years to give, I think, grounds for cautious optimism. When you're looking at the Starbucks or Amazon or the auto workers, the recent UAW strike. A lot depends on the political environment that confronts workers, and so probably I noted that the SEIU, the Service Employees Industrial Union, has pledged to make a donation to the Biden campaign in the amount of $200 million this year. I didn't know they had $200 million, but I think what that suggests is a deep sense that everything is at stake for the prospects for labor in what direction government takes. I don't know, you have thoughts?
Even college athletes.
College athletes, that's right.
We desperately need to
Yeah. Yes.
Why?
Oh, why?
They're already paying a free ride. Give me a break.
Well, that's a lively question. There's no doubt about it. Graduate assistants, that's a big area of organizing. Among other places. At Berkeley, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is backing up a little bit as far as rap music. One of the transitions in the 60s into rap music was a person named Gil Scott-Heron, who had very powerful social, connotations to his music.
Yeah. That's true. In fact, I tend to be drawn towards labor and struggles for labor and civil rights. But of course, there's a far broader kind of, canvas of protest music and periods that we barely touched on here that are worthy of attention. Gil Scott-Heron is a part of that tradition in the 60s. Bob Marley. Yeah. Other thoughts? Who have I left out? That,
How about literature?
oh, you want to bring in literature?
As in literature.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
That made big impressions.
Music is only one arena of the arts that can, I mean, The Jungle is one of the few books that you could say did much, it was the catalyst for whole pop. That's why we have the Food and Drug Act, Drug Administration, meat inspection was at least prompted by that book more than anything else. Uncle Tom's Cabin. That was a transformative novel. Any other singers or songs that I left out that come to mind? Yeah.
This is going way back. I was thinking of Amazing Grace and William Wilberforce and the movement to abolish slavery in England,
Yeah.
where that came out of. His use of, I can't remember the preacher who wrote the song, and his name escapes my mind.
That's mine
But he
too.
was a former slave ship master and turned abolitionist, and wrote that song, and which was a very powerful centerpiece for the abolitionist movement in the United Kingdom.
He had been a wretch.
Right.
Yeah.
Famous old song from the 1800s was the Hard Times. The song Hard Times. Hard times come here no more.
Yeah.
Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Hard times don't come here again no more.
Could you sing it to him?
Yeah.
I don't know the whole thing,
Yeah.
but
I've
he's a
heard,
famous songwriter, and right now, brain dead, you know, was. But,
from the 1800s.
yeah, the 1860s, 70s.
I feel like, yeah, I don't know the song, but I feel, I'm aware that there was a song called Hard Times.
I used to get together with a lot of musicians and people.
Oh, yeah.
We'd have these 4th of July.
Stephen Foster.
Stephen Foster.
Thank you.
That's not surprising.
That's it. Thank you.
That's right. Stephen Foster was the great, and the Hutchinson family singers. Stephen Foster was,
Yeah, it's one of my favorite songs.
yeah.
We'd have a whole bunch of people together, we'd be singing that.
Is that right?
Really fun, yeah.
It's great to get together and sing.
We had a tribute to Pete Seeger in New York at one point, and it was just really powerful. All these people had been his friends and stuff were all together, and they called Black Forum at the John Jay School of Criminal Justice.
Oh, yeah.
And it was I get together for a sing-along, and it was just tremendous. It was probably one after he passed away.
Yeah, he died around 2012 or so.
Incredible sing-along.
How many people know Pete Seeger songs when they've grown up on songs of Pete Seeger? Yeah. Pete Seeger he may not have had the greatest voice, great banjo player, but the magic that he had is you could walk into any room and get people to sing.
You could.
Yeah. And that was for him very political. There's the fact of it, that you get people engaged in something beyond themselves. It's a real inspiration.
There should be some new songs coming out because we have a very large population, especially in California, of homeless people, as in the Great Depression. And it's horrendous how they live.
There's still, I Ain't Got No Home. It's why that song, it's why people born long after the Depression who perform would hear that song and think, I want to play that. Right? It's in our world.
You got the dough in me.
You got the devil in me. What do you got, three?
Bernice Reagan Johnson was here a couple of years ago at Now, and she sang a sing-along for us. She was a frequent singer on the buses.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are shy to sing,
You know, when Pete Seeger wrote me back, when I sent him that letter for the Onlookers Journal, he was very excited. He says, I'm going to make copies of this and send it around to Bernice, Reagan, and a bunch of other people. But that was the person he named. She's really something.
Thank you. You gotta come back and do the 60s.
Be happy to. It's really, I appreciate you having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Very good. Member of the executive board.
All right, if I can have your attention, thank you everyone for coming. Our annual banquet will be Thursday, April 18th. Social hours from 5:30 to 6:30. Dinner is at 6:30, it is a buffet. Our caterer is hometown favorite, that would be Lisa's Milltown Deli, that would be at 6:30. Our speaker is a local historian, a very good speaker, his name is John Deppen, and he's going to talk about the Doughboys, which is World War I. Also something very exciting, from 5:30 to 6:30 for a social hour, you will be entertained by the Milton High School Jazz Band. So that's from 5:30 to 6:30. This is on the second floor of the now Milton Community Center, which is the Moose in Chester. We have reservations out here on the table, and I need to caution you that we, to eliminate some of our overcrowding from last year, we will be taking the first 60 reservations. So make sure that you get your reservation set in. I would be remiss if I didn't thank some people that help us put this on. Number one, John McWilliams, who does an excellent job.
Yes.
Providing the presenters, and you have to admit this year was very, very good. We also have to thank the Milton School District, John McCarthy, who's a supervisor, Darren Tall, who takes care of the facilities, Wayne Gimmerling, who is our IT guy, Caroline Dory, who's a custodial person who, listen, this doesn't happen by itself, puts up chairs, takes care of the projector and everything else. So I just thank them because otherwise we would not be here. So thank you.
Yeah.